I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to Slee Rickets. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you too if you've had a chance recently to recommend the show to a friend. That makes a big difference. That's really our only that's the only kind of advertising or promotion we do. So thank you very much, and welcome to anybody who is new to the show. If you are new to the show, this is not a typical episode, though what a typical episode is exactly is sometimes difficult to define. I'm not going to promote the secret show because there's too much shit to talk about, but look it up if you feel so inclined. This is a weird one. This was not. This very little of this went as planned. I was badly underprepared for our planned topic, which didn't end up being our topic at all. I also was dealing with my daughters a lot that day, and then they end up interrupting the recording as well. We were supposed to talk about line breaks. We were also supposed to talk about Alice Oswald, and specifically a lecture she gave. That we do get to that lecture a little bit later on in the conversation. And I understand Alice Oswald recently started listening to the show, at least some of it. Professor Oswald, if you are listening, just know that you are welcome to come on the show anytime you like and tell me what a fucking idiot I am, because I'm sure that we say plenty of things. I'm sure we get a lot wrong. So often what we'll do is we'll kind of come up with a couple of beefier topics and then maybe have a few little, whimsical questions or icebreakers. And Alice had a semi-joking, or at least I thought it was a semi-joking objection in our WhatsApp thread to a really fleeting moment in an episode Cameron and I had recorded. And that ends up being mostly what we talk about. We mostly talk about a single sentence from Audre Lorde's famous 1979 convention speech, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." Conveniently, the sentence we talked about was also the title of this piece. That's all I knew of it. At any rate, I have since then, I did read this speech. It's very short. It's a 3-page speech. I'll include a link in the show notes. And it's, as Alice suggested, there is more to get from it than that one line. That line is the one that's quoted ad nauseum today. There is some poetry in this episode. We do get into the Alice Oswald lecture some, and I think we may touch briefly on line breaks. Still some things I'd like to talk about there, but this seemed like a conversation worth having at the time, and I hope you will agree that it's one I thought worth sharing. As always, let me know what. Feel free always. You listener, and Alice Oswald, feel free to tell me when I am an idiot. I'm always interested in learning more. So here's just a part of the speech that I thought stood out. This is a speech she gave at the tail end of a feminist conference in 1979. Poor women and women of color know there is a difference between the daily manifestations of marital slavery and prostitution, because it is our daughters who line 42nd Street. If white American feminist theory need not deal with the differences between us and the resulting difference in our oppressions, then how do you deal with the fact that the women who clean your houses and tend your children while you attend conferences on feminist theory are, for the most part, poor women and women of color? What is the theory behind racist feminism? In a world of possibility for us all, our personal visions help lay the groundwork for political action. The failure of academic feminists to recognize difference as a crucial strength is a failure to reach beyond the first patriarchal lesson. In our world, divide and conquer must become define and empower. So, as I said, I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I thought it was an articulation of a thought worth hearing, and might help provide a little bit of additional context for the one line that we end up spending a long time talking about. As I said, not a typical episode. There is some poetry in it, but it's a weird one, and because it was one in which I feel like we got to Alice gave us something that I think has not always been available in the past, and which, as I said, I hope was not too great. It was not too taxing for her. She is, as you all know, the very, very best. So here's a conversation with Alice and Cameron. Oh, I also, because I was scrambling in and out of the room to deal with my daughters, there is a little conversation at the beginning it's just Alice and Cameron speaking. I didn't know about any of that when we had our conversation, but I thought it would be worth leaving in. They talk a little bit about privilege in institutional and educational contexts, and so I thought I would leave that in before we get to before we get derailed properly.
Are you happy at Oxford? Do you like it there?
Yes, I want to be here more than I want to be anywhere other place, and
That's pretty
I
good.
can't really think of other, I can't think of alternatives that I haven't done that sound. Well, no, I can think of incredible alternatives I haven't done that sound better than Oxford, but I can't think of any likely alternatives that are
Hmm.
better than here. It's
What
a
would be
weird.
your like dream alternative?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like surreal shit. Like I don't know. Like the life, like the early life of Rambo was like pretty great, and until like he dies in Africa. But like apart from that, apart from like being like somewhere in like a fantasized, fantasized, not quite real version of like artistic bohemia, Oxford's pretty okay. Like I'd
Mm.
rather be here than sort of grinding into sort of the into work, which is coming, given like a year or so. But it's yeah, it's good. It's good here. It's a really weird place, and incredibly strange levels of sort of wealth disparity between the students
Yeah.
they take in. I'm in one of the better colleges for that. It's weird. Mainly sort of people who went to non-private schools and have got sort of lower middle class. I think is probably the average in my college. But yeah, there's still some colleges that are sort of insanely fucking like Eton type shit.
Mm.
Everyone's posh and shit. Like, yeah, it varies, but this part of Oxford I'm in is pretty nice. So yeah, I'm happy here,
Yeah.
more or less.
How do you relate to people like that who have had just such privileged lives?
I don't know if I could unless we had a shared interest.
Mm.
I don't know if I could relate to people. Although maybe I guess because privilege is such a sort of weird, complicated, slightly undefinable thing. I guess I might be able to relate to people who've had like privileged lives, but also sort of experienced, I guess, minoritization in some form, maybe better than I could just relate to like incredibly privileged straight white males. Maybe I don't
Yeah.
know. It's it's a big curve. Yeah. What do you? How many? You must have encountered pretty privileged people at some point, right?
Only really when we were living in New York and sort of like it's not Silicon Valley, but like Silicon Valley bros,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of privilege, like people who had been to Stanford and or been to Yale and had just had these amazing lives where everything was sort of handed to them. I also do part of like what I do freelance is I write a newsletter for a very very rich boys school here in Melbourne, and I get a
Right.
real window into like the life of privilege through that,
Yeah.
which helps you like has helped me to understand the world a bit better because I'm like,
Oh, it's
oh,
fascinating.
if everything's handed to you right at the very start, you really can't fail unless you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Very true. I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
And I think
but
last time you and I talked one on one, you were sort of saying, you were talking about the difficulty in finding a poetry community. Has that changed much in the last sort of 6 months?
not materially. I am in communication with more poets than I ever have been, which is nice. In fact, actually, I mean, I need to get back to it. Alice Oswald, who we may be, we may be talking about, is actually meeting up with me in private on the 1st or 2nd of February. So this isn't a workshop; it's just a one-to-one meeting. So that'd be nice. But yeah, I
That's
don't have any.
amazing.
That'd be fun. But I don't have any sort of don't have any physical community or people per se. I have online communities, but I've always had sort of a rage around that those places. Although I always say this, I am not so I'm on the outskirts of those communities and sort of being liked and what I seem to find aesthetically pleasurable compared to them. But yeah, I think I'm happy with the amount of people I email, and I like that. I it's interesting because half the things you hear about poetry communities from like your podcast and a bit with Matthew is negative, and I don't particularly like sort of the poetry world in its sort of weirdly sort of neoliberal sort of job climbing and vague pretentious towards sort of I don't know weird Marxism and like its sort of fakeness. But I do love talking to individual poets about poetry and language. So I know it's a balancing act. Maybe I'm in a good place of being sort of maybe detached digital communication, but I don't know.
It's hard to measure, I guess. Yeah.
Mm.
Detachment seems like a good strategy.
I'm very thankful. I can talk to people I can. So
Oh, here comes Matthew now.
When Cameron and I last spoke, we talked about the Audre Lorde line, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. I think that's it. And we both thought that was a self-evidently silly statement, both on a literal and a metaphorical level. And I know, I mean, I've read none of Audre Lorde, I don't think. And Cameron's read a little, but you
Yeah.
said we had something wrong about her.
Yeah. No, I mean you're wrong on every level. Like
Okay.
there was a lot in that episode that I didn't agree with, but I'm not gonna fight other people's battles. But yeah, that was the moment listening to it where I was like, you just invoked the phrase and then blew past it, being like, no, obviously that's stupid. And I was just sitting there being like, what? This is a
Yeah.
foundational idea of feminism that you're just like chucking aside. What
Yeah.
do you mean? Like, please explain.
Do you want to take literal or figurative, Cameron, or how should we split this up?
um I'll take literal.
All right,
Yeah,
go for
you
literal.
can do the heavy lifting with figure.
Yeah, great.
Well,
Thanks.
literally, yeah, literal is kind of easy, isn't it? Like as long as the master's tools aren't like a tiny little, I don't know, a tiny little spade, what tools used to
Your master's
subjugate
a
people
child.
will. I, well, look, I'm just trying to like worm my way out of any like loopholes. But like tools used to subjugate people will work equally well on destroying the subjugator, literally.
Oh, I thought we were talking about a literal house first, like a literal
Well, yeah,
house.
okay, fine. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure, fine. I moved into metaphor. Yeah,
yeah.
the master, yeah, like most tools will dismantle a fucking house. Like the master's tools will dismantle the master's house. It doesn't work on a literal scale.
Yeah. Like demolition involves a lot of hammers, as does
Yeah,
construction. So
yeah.
that, yeah, in that level, I
Mm.
think it's not a great metaphor to. It doesn't. If the goal is to make an otherwise uh, unfamiliar abstract concept accessible, it's a bizarre way to go about that because the image it presents is a nonsensical one. And
Well,
then and
it
then
sounds
yeah, sorry.
lovely, doesn't it? It sounds nice, but I don't think it
Yeah,
makes sense
yeah,
on a
it's like
literal.
verbally symmetrical, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
logically and literally nonsensical. Uh, but if we're just talking about dismantling, then like fucking why not? Why wouldn't the master's tools work? Whatever you want to call them, like literal, metaphorical, like of course they would work. Like if the tools are literal tools for building a house, then like those are the same tools you use to tear it down. Other than like you bring in a, and even if you're having to bring in a wrecking ball, like you may not have used a wrecking ball to build the house, but it's still the master's tools. And then if like violence and propaganda is what builds up the master's house and the sense of patriarchy, I guess, and like the noble lie of Plato and these sort of things that we tell like, hey Ellie, baby, I thought I just talked to you in a bed. Like these things definitely like yeah. How do you think you dismantle that. Like, yeah, I think. So I'm distracted by my daughter's tools are dismantling the master's attention right now. Sorry, tell us what we're. Give us the thing that didn't land for us with the
Yeah.
first time we heard it, I guess, and help us understand.
Let me introduce it a bit better too. So the context is that she's been invited to speak at a conference in New York. This is in the mid-'80s, and she is really angry because she feels that, well, she has been put on the program right at the very end as a little kind of add-on to this uniformly white feminist conference as the only representative of black people and lesbians. So she's come in to say, those of us who stand outside the circle of this society's definition of acceptable women, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbians, who are black, who are older, know that survival is not an academic skill. It is learning how to take our differences and make them strengths. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. So, that was life-changing for me when I read it. It opened up a new way of seeing things that I had never considered before, because if you do use master's tools to try to dismantle something like patriarchy, then you end up with girl boss feminism, essentially. You end up just recapitulating and reinforcing stuff. And she does say, you can temporarily beat him at his own game. So yes, you can dismantle, take apart the house, but that doesn't mean that the house isn't going to get rebuilt. And also, you've just learned how to use the tools of your oppressor better. You haven't done anything imaginative. You haven't thought outside of the parameters that you've been given that are oppressing you. So you haven't gotten anywhere. Yeah,
I feel like a poor oppressor. It's the poor oppressor who blames his tools, right? Like it's the tool. The tools are not the evil thing, right? I mean, that isn't that true in almost all circuits? Like with the exception of I don't know, the atom bomb, like chemical warfare. Like there are very few tools that are intrinsically good or bad. It's almost always a matter of how you use them, I would think.
I think about a tool like violence, for example. It rarely helps in a situation where someone is being violent to just get more violent. Or if someone's screaming at you, if you just scream louder, you're probably not going to dismantle, you're not going to diffuse that situation very well. Yeah. That's how I think of it. It's just you have to be more creative than your oppressor.
It does seem like there's a very handy little trick she performs in saying survival is not for all of us, survival is not an academic procedure. Academic, what does it she say?
An academic skill, yeah.
Right. So for all of us, survival is not an academic skill. And then she moves from there pretty quickly to the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. But those are actually two very different claims. One is the claim that I totally sympathize with, which is you fucking pinheads are talking about revolution, but all you're doing is writing papers in scholarly journals. That's not actually helping anybody's, that's not improving anyone's life. That's not making any real change. That's not even picking up a machine gun, right? But then that's actually a separate claim from it's the tools itself that made this system evil, and using the same tools will never I mean, I don't know. I just find that to be, again, a very stirring sentiment and a very effective piece of rhetoric, but I just don't think it conveys any kind of penetrating truth. The tools of the tools of the subaltern, take the tools of the underclass, however you want to define the people who are not in charge, whatever those tools are, those can also be used for good or evil, right? Can't they? I mean, is it the tools themselves that possess the charge of goodness or badness?
Let me read you another paragraph, please. See if it helps at all. Yeah. This is towards the end. Women of today are still being called upon to stretch across the gap of male ignorance and to educated men as to our existence and our needs. This is an old and primary tool of all oppressors, to keep the oppressed occupied with the master's concerns. Now we hear that it is the task of women of colour to educate white women, in the face of tremendous resistance, as to our existence, our differences, our relative roles in our joint survival. This is a diversion of energies and a tragic repetition of racist patriarchal thought. So again, it's this thing of like, you are wasting time and energy and you're describing, even in this conversation right now, I'm talking to two of you who are far more educated than I am, and I'm trying to use everything I can.
No, sorry, I'm losing some of your sound. I just want to hear everything you're saying.
Oh, sorry.
It's skipping a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder how I can
Your
fix
thought
that.
after the quotation, like the application of this principle.
Yeah. Just even now, I'm kind of doing the same thing that she's telling us not to do, which is you guys are both way more educated than I am, and I'm still like sitting here trying to like use whatever like facts and quotes and things that I can draw on to convince you. But what Audre Lorde would say would be like, you're wasting your time. You shouldn't be doing this. This is a diversion of your energies. You need to get more creative.
Was she talking to you or us, do you think? Or none of us?
I think she was talking to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she's talking to other feminists. Yeah.
Do you? Well, and I also I dispute the claim that we're both more educated than you. I mean, it's just as you said, like this is a woman, you know her work at least well enough to like have thoughts and feelings about it, and I know it not at all, except for this one claim that I thought was silly. What do you think? Do you think it's a waste of your time? What should you be doing instead?
I know from my own life that you can spend a lot of time having these conversations and it doesn't tend to go very far. But I guess I wanted to bring it up with you guys because it was a moment of like, oh, wait a minute. Why don't they agree with that? Like, what's going on here? I needed to understand like what it was specifically that you didn't agree with in that. But it sounds like you just don't really like the choice of word, which I suppose we can agree to disagree on.
Can I come in here because I feel like I'm caught between you, both
Please.
of you.
Yeah.
I totally agree with everything she says in terms of activism. I agree with the educating thing. I agree. I don't agree that you're less educated than us, Alice, but I agree on what she says about what Lorde says about education. And I do wonder if what says is tools, I might just say is strategies, because it seems
Yeah,
like
strategies works.
yeah, and also strategies is more abstract than tools. But I guess I think we're not even working. I think we're working at slight cross purposes. Is when I think about it. When I sort of dismissed the comment, I was talking about its use by some people in poetry to say that this type of artistic, because it was used by like white oppressors in the past, should be ignored. So I guess I was coming to it from a purely aesthetic viewpoint, where you seem to be coming from it from a more sort of a more in life. I don't want to say political because I think political diminishes it from sort of a whole life, a whole life strategy to just one sphere, but sort of a cultural idea to live by. Why I guess I was then thinking and invested in it purely as sort of an artistic critique in poetic.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Seems like part of what
Yeah, maybe I didn't quite.
no part of what you're expressing though, Alice, is that listening to this or reading this or encountering this speech, or at least this passage from it, had an effect on you that sounds. I mean, really, what it tracks with, it sounds very similar to the effect of a good or a moving poem that you hear or you read at the right age. That like opens something up. It reveals a perspective to you or a way of feeling, or it like chimes with something that you recognize, and it rings true. And whether or not the individual clauses within it can withstand sort of a dry scientific scrutiny is a little bit beside the point. But like something about this utterance stirred you and got at an experience that you understood or maybe came to understand even better. And in a way, we're doing the wrong thing when we hear it as a kind of a logical or practical claim. Is that
Yeah, I guess I
fair
just
or
wanted to
unfair?
restore it a little bit. Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah,
definitely fair. I thought it would be worth just trying to bring, like,
yeah.
yeah, reinstate it, because it was a moment for me encountering this idea where I was like, now I can see that it isn't just a matter of like taking the men out of the powerful positions and slotting in women, because
Right.
the women will often just end up doing the same kind of oppressive work because the power structure hasn't changed at all. And that's what she's complaining about in terms of this conference, right? It's like it might as well just be like an all white male conference for like
Uh,
um all the work you've done.
Yeah.
It's just like too surface level. You need to go deeper, you need to get more imaginative, and you need to stop using the same strategies. That's a really good word, Cameron. Yeah. So now you've met really head up feminist Alice,
No, that's
and
good. That's
I'm
good.
sure that you regret asking
No, not at
me.
all. No, I
no,
don't at
I
all.
no,
No,
not at
I'm very
all.
glad to. No, like this
No,
is, yeah.
this seems to me this the effect this has on Alice reminded me of when my friend sent me a few weeks ago a quote by I think a black woman on TikTok who said just something along the lines of something very simple along the lines of like I cannot be bothered accommodating white people anymore, or maybe I'm so tired of accommodating white people anymore, and like that primarily I felt very I felt sort of I'd hit an epiphany with that because like I am so fucking tired of accommodating patronizing sighted people who I
Mm.
encounter every fucking day. I'm tired of that. Also, my mum, I just had like a recent conversation with my mum about the racism she'd like encountered. So I was I don't feel the quote literally on a personal level, but I felt it sort of familiar through family, and I felt it I felt it referentially as connected to sort of my own experiences as a very different minority. But I mean, that seems to me, and also I don't want to guess at your experience, but I guess I feel like I can empathize with your love of the Lord quote because I feel like that is what I come from the other quote. Also, Matthew, the way
Yeah,
you
please.
define that Alice's response to that Lord quote as like a response to a good poem is
Yeah.
maybe one of the big differences between the three of us because I would not describe to a poem. I
You
don't
would
know.
not describe,
I
I missed a little clip of what you
well,
said.
like, sorry, I would not. I would not if I had that experience. I'd not think, oh, this is like reading a great poem. I think I just think, oh, this is like being having a revelation of something to me. But I don't know. I think that is one of the big differences maybe where the two of you encounter poems differently. That the emotional aspect of a poem is more bound up in the language for me, while it seems that you guys
Yeah.
seem to experience a poem as sort of like an emotionally revelatory act.
Yeah, I mean, both. I mean, but again, that's that question of translation. I mean, Alice and I just did a good long episode. I'm going to try to release the first part of it this week about Horace, and all of that's in translation. But I think like there's a good portion of lyric poetry that is translatable. There's much of it that is not, and even in a good translation, it has to have the right words to transmit it. But yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. Like I don't have that response to this Lord passage, but I've had it to other things that struck other people. It's like, you know, like Old Joy, which at some point we'll talk about. Joanna saw that and was just thought like, what is this fucking like two grubby guys going on a hike with a dog? The fuck is this? Um and like they seem so self-involved. It's like, yeah, they definitely are self-involved. Like definitely like this is sort of a pointless movie with no plot about nothing that happens and two guys that don't matter. And like only the dog is universally, you know, lovable, but it just totally tore my heart out and still does. So I mean, I think that's what you were describing sounded to me like an aesthetic, an emotional aesthetic response, which I totally can relate to personally. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's what it was, and yeah, just exactly like you described, Cameron. It's sort of that moment of like, I'm going to put all this concern, this need to kind of educate, make other people comfortable, think about where I'm going to put that all down. I mean, yeah, I spent so many years trying to change people around me for like absolutely no gain, and it really just exhausted me, alienated them. I don't think the answer necessarily is for everybody to retreat to their respective corners and never talk about any of this stuff. But I do think that there is a really important, like, this quote of Lord's is like finding a new, it's being translated again into that kind of sentiment of like, I can't be bothered dealing with white people. I don't want to deal with patronizing people. It's just like, yeah, save your energy, pick your battles if you want to fight at all.
Meanwhile, I can just do whatever I like, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I try not to think of, like, I don't know. I try not to think of behavior in terms of being, is this feminist, is this progressive? But like a thought I have had about some of this sort of thing is that I definitely know, like, I'm not so autistic that I like can't pick up on the script for how a good, enlightened, arts affiliated, like, millennial white man is supposed to behave. Like, I 100% know that the correct thing to do is to nod deferentially to an Audre Lorde quote and to invite, accounts of a lived experience, and accept them totally at face value, and not try to engage in a critical way with art or essays that sort of have God on their side from a progressive point of view. Like, I know that, but I also, part of me, which has done that for a long time, also feels like, God, that's so fucking condescending. And like, as someone
Don't do
who's
that.
always been
Don't
very
do that.
bad, I've always been very bad at normal social interactions, and like above average at like arguing classroom interactions. Like that's where I was sort of like able to a little bit hold my own. And part of what I felt it as a student, I felt as a teacher, I feel it as a father, is like, I want to give like full credit to people who are participating in this arena, like, of whatever background, of whatever origin, of whatever like previous marginalized history. Like, I want to give full credit and say, like, welcome in, like, let's fucking go, let's do this, like, let's play the game that we're here to play. Not because I want to be mean and yell at people, but because I don't want to pull my intellectual punches with people because they've historically been oppressed. Because I think that's not only because I think like that's not
Right.
very intellectually honest, but also because I think like it's sort of shitty and racist and sexist to do that, is kind of my feeling.
Yes,
Also, like,
that is just
but
that
like,
is
which isn't to say I'm not also an asshole and I don't also get things wrong, but like, I'm not, I play the oblivious oaf somewhat, and I am somewhat oblivious, but some of this is not totally unconsidered, if that makes sense.
you,
Tell me
there's
if
a
it doesn't,
kind
though,
of
please.
a kind of there's no, I totally agree. I think there's a kind of like a fetishistic condescension that white people do like these types of texts that I really hate, and I think it's like its own form of it's its own racism. It disgusts me that, like, white people just, some white people just sort of nod along to it and then just walk away, and just like don't engage it. A lack of engagement is like a condescension in itself, because like, you don't feel like you need to engage with it, or you're in some way. A lack of engagement with a text, a lack of wrestling with a text, is placing yourself above that text, and that is racism. When white people do that, that's horrible. People do not do that, however well intentioned it is. It is a form of like destructiveness.
So I mean, this is a quote I've heard many times before. Literally, it's the only thing I've heard from her. I don't know what it says. That, like, as with maybe like, just as conservatives love to quote the one line from the "I Have a Dream" speech, like that maybe this is like the one line that like my my like women's studies feminist bros, and back home would love a quote of Audre Lorde. So like I've heard it many times, and almost all of those times I've just said, okay. And I would like, I don't know. Like again, I think you're probably hitting on something in like noting that like she's not really talking to me. She's not really concerned with anything I'm thinking or doing. So it doesn't necessarily like it doesn't necessarily matter what I say in response to it. But I have somewhat consciously thought like, why not go ahead and try to see what's going on here? And it may be that the answer is, well, why not? Is that it just gets in other people's way.
Yeah, I think you just have to consider your context, right? Like, this is a conversation that we have all volunteered to have. I've come here with fucking notes, so like I'm ready to talk to you. But yeah, you would obviously know, like, bowl up to someone at a cocktail party and be like, "So I heard this thing about Audre Lorde, and I don't agree with it, and you got to educate me as to why." Like, obviously, you would never do something like that.
I can't remember the last time I
yeah.
started a conversation at a cocktail party.
Yeah,
Like almost
seem like I really.
I'm like only defensive conversations. It's like
Yeah.
Taekwondo. It's like my daughter's learning Taekwondo. Like you never use this as a source of violence. Like you never go out and pick a fight with it. So,
But yeah, it's telling that you use the phrase, "I don't want to pull my punches," because in that is kind of this inbuilt knowledge that like you do have like a level of like intellectual power, and also like thinking, and like a canon behind you that supports your way of thinking. Like, so you, I don't quite know what I'm trying to say.
It is combative.
Just,
I don't think it's necessarily canonical, but I do think. I mean, my feeling on that though is that like for a long time, women and minorities of different kinds were not allowed into the room where self-important white men were doing this shit, and that sucks. And there are many different ways to correct that, and part of that has been corrected. And at this point, in terms of sex, like women are way outperforming men, like to an almost like actually like alarming degree in America, at least. Like in academic settings in America, women are so outperforming men that like men are, there's some like things are not going to look good in a generation or two. But not because women are doing well, because men are doing poorly. But I think like part of my thought is like, this is what we've been doing in this room that you weren't allowed in. We've been punching, like we've been having at it. And so that's when I say I don't want to pull my punches, I don't mean like you're coming in and you're the other, and so I'm going to punch you with all of the authority I have. It's more like we've been scrapping. That's what this is. Come scrap with us.
And I think what Audre Lorde would say is like, just don't go in that room. Let's make a different room.
She would say that to you.
Yeah.
She would say that to me. No,
No, she would say that to me. Yeah. I don't think she would talk to you.
No, I mean, and to be honest, like I wouldn't be in the room. She would be in it. She was in that room that I'm not in. So I'm not that worried about.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Are there things, if I'm going to read some Audre Lorde, if I'm going to add it, I mean, realistically, I'm going to add it to my very long list, but like a genuine list, what's a thing I should add? And I hesitate to ask Cameron, because whatever I ask Cameron, it's going to be like extremely long. It's going to be insanely long if I ask Cameron.
Yeah, this is 3 pages long. It's 3 pages.
Just this little speech would be a good place to start.
Yeah, okay. Just read that.
Yeah. All right.
This seems fascinating to me because we've spent the entire time talking about Audre Lorde, the socio-cultural essayist. When I thought we were going to talk about Lorde, I went back to the Poetry Foundation and read some of her poems because I thought we were going to talk about poetic quality.
I thought she was mostly a poet.
Yeah, but we've spent the entire time essays.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I also wasn't sure. I couldn't read the tone of those texts, so I wasn't sure like how much we were going to do. I mean, I didn't have time anyway because I ended up being stuck in the car the whole time. But I wasn't sure if it was I actually didn't understand the tone of like half of those texts. Now that I realize it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, what do you have some insights about Audre Lorde the poet, Cameron?
No, not really. As I said before, I think she's a decent enough poet, but I don't think she's a particularly sort of. I don't find her poetry particularly stunning or moving or world rearranging. it is maybe condescending, but I think it's also my utter opinion, and therefore it's my uncut opinion. So I think I'd rather say my uncut opinion and condescend to her with some sort of nice piece of bullshit. I think that her worth probably lies in her essayistic functions more than her poems. But maybe you and Alice can prove me wrong about that.
No, no, I haven't read enough of her poetry to talk about it, so you're off the hook.
Okay.
Every the hook.
Well,
But
yeah.
that's fascinating. People, we talk about we so much conversations about these thinkers, Audre Lorde, and I think to a slightly lesser degree Adrian Rich. I mean, there's more conversation about Adrian Rich's poetry. A lot of this comes down to sort of their conceptual work, and not much conversation comes down to their poetic work, even though they're called poets. And I wonder
Yeah.
why is this?
I mean, I thought that was the most interesting part of that Angie Linko essay. That like we talked a little bit about Alice, and like I had plenty to object to in that essay, but like that was the part that, from an artistic perspective, I was most curious about. Is like because I'm trying to remember where I was. I read something about, I think it was Liszt, the composer, who, not because he was a feminist activist, but because he was like extremely talented, but ended up sort of like his talent went to like a lot of transposition problems. Like he ended up like composing very little original work, and almost all of it was like significant, demanding work, but it didn't result in a lasting corpus so much as it like made use of his brilliant mind in these slightly different directions. And it seems like that is a sort of thing that can happen with certain poets.
Yeah,
I had
it just depends where your legacy lands, right? Like it could easily be that Lord or Rich were better public intellectuals than they were poets. People would agree or disagree with that. Like that's okay.
If I'm going to be entirely paranoid, I'd say that I do think this happens slightly more with black writers. And I do wonder if it's again sort of the white condescension that we'd rather take their ideas into account than sort of face up to their poetry. I don't know. I
Yeah,
mean,
could be.
I was really happy a while back as I read it. I really like Lucille Clifton. I read an article about Lucille Clifton that talked talked sort of close read one of her poems, and I was really happy to see her genius for language and techne really put under the microscope. But it seems to me for a lot of black writers, are treated in a sort of conceptual way, and sort of their technical skill as poets is really sort of thrown to a side, especially by white reviewers.
Oh yeah, I mean, most of the white reviews of black poets end up being just farts and sunshine. I mean, just like this is so great and so brave and so brilliant and so important. I mean, it's like the Janelle Monáe character in Glass Onion. It's just all all like unarticulated pluses.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
racism. Like
sucks.
that's
It
benign
sucks.
racism, but it's still
Sucks
racism.
to read. It's useless as criticism. It's publicity is all it is, and it's publicity, and it's like intellectual money laundering. Like it's a way to say like, see, I'm good now. Look what I published about Ta-Nehisi Coates or whoever. Although he mostly is in essays. It's funny. I don't know if I was going to say it. So here's a question I had listening to the Alice Oswald lecture. You said it's this Alice Oswald lecture. I've read poems of hers that I was really impressed by. Listening to her, it's very clear there's like a really fascinating mind at work there. I was reminded a little bit of like that Mary Gateskill essay, as well as like some Joyce Carol Oates stuff, where like my thought kept being, is this someone whose talent significantly outstrips her intelligence? And I don't mean that in any way as a dismissive description, but no, I mean, because I would say like the converse, which is your intelligence significantly outstrips your talent, is like is in a way like that's a terrible curse. Like I see that with Dana Gioia, I see that with William Logan, I think I see that with James Longenbach, though I haven't read enough of him. Like no poet would choose that imbalance, right? Any poet I know would choose talent over intelligence. And And I kind of got that impression with Alice Oswald. I'm like, she's talking about the stuff that just sounded batty, but it's like she's not a fool, and she's clearly intelligent, but also the richness of her mind doesn't seem to be so much a it's not horsepower so much as it's something else. Seemed to me to be the case.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I wonder
She
about
was
like,
pretty baffling in parts.
yeah, I wonder if there's like if there are like Achilles had that forked destiny where he could, like, before he killed Hector and his destiny was sealed, he could either have lived a long and prosperous and happy life as king of Thea, or he could go to battle, die young, and live forever in glory. Right? Like those were kind of the two options. And I wonder if you're a poet who has sort of equal parts talent and intelligence, if you're faced with a similar kind of choice. And I wonder with some poets, I was going to say, Cameron, like part of it might be white condescension. Part of it might also be the demands of the moment, right? Like the social context of the moment might call more for what, like James Baldwin, I think, is somebody who made some significant art, but probably did more essayistic work and probably was more pushed by the demands of the moment to do the latter. And in a slightly different context, might have just been sort of more of a pure, beautiful poet kind of writer, as if that makes sense. Like, I wonder how much of that, like, if there's certain balances where you have a little bit of a choice depending on how things split.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. Although I bulk a little bit what you said about James Baldwin because I think oh no, yeah, did James Baldwin who did Giovanni's Room? Is that yeah, that is James Baldwin.
Yeah.
I think Giovanni's Room is a great novel. Really good.
I think it's a great novel that
So, like,
definitely could have used another strong line edit. But yeah. Yeah.
Right. I'm in the middle of a discussion with Ryan at the moment about different trends in different poetic expressions that mainly runs along the idea of the mimetic tradition versus the expressive tradition. And the mimetic tradition is sort of when one sort of produces effects in poems that imitate the subject. So I think there's a cross poem.
Cameron, let me hold you there because I think we may have a little minute later, but I know Alice is going to have to go soon enough. I wanted to hear from you a little bit before you have to go about, you talked a little on the group chat about your experience with line breaks, and how that's changed. And I think like a somewhat significant way over the last couple of years. Is that something you can talk some about, or you have something else you're more on your mind, or you?
Oh, me, not Cameron.
Yeah, you. No, I'm saying like I
Yeah,
want to hear like because
yeah.
you're an endangered resource. Like we're gonna lose you in a little bit. So I want
Yeah.
Yeah. It has changed pretty significantly, I think. But just in my own writing, and I don't know how interesting that is, but I've changed my view on it, which was previously it was the line break decisions were decisions that I made mostly on instinct, and more recently I've started to think about it in terms of the effect that they have. So there being and this, I mean, I'm sure people are rolling their eyes because it's like so obvious and I should have known this already, but it's like they're a crucial tool that you have to use very carefully, very intentionally. They do a lot of heavy lifting, and I just wasn't appreciating that before, and I'm glad I finally got it.
What has been the relationship between that change and your attitude toward them, or your treatment of them, and your experience with meter? Because I know that's had some correlation.
Yeah, so that would also be, I think, just learning a little bit more about that has helped me to see just what a poem has to do at the line level. But obviously when you're working with meter, you have these particular constraints, and then if you're not, you have slightly more room to move. But so I think it focused it quite a bit more for me. But I used to just think that there was, oh, there goes Cameron. He's bored out of his mind. He's gone. Yeah, I don't know if I have much smart to say about this.
You said
Cameron was going to read me about it.
You came to think that we shouldn't use the default should be you don't notice the line breaks when you're hearing it or when you're reading it.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it in terms of like editing film and how poorly edited it can just be so distracting. And then I thought that's kind of like a poem with really bad line breaks that are constantly like yanking you out of the experience of the poem. And I've been working on this poem for like a year that I just cannot get the lines to sit right. And starting to think about the week kind of comparison, I was like, okay, well maybe it's just a matter of making them as unnoticeable as possible, because everything else I try to do is just not working, and it feels like distracting and janky and annoying. So yeah.
I remember there's a line Alec Guinness had, the same autobiography in which he didn't acknowledge Star Wars as a part of his career. He completely insignificant.
Nice.
He said that as he gets older as an actor, he just tries to do less. And I feel like there's certain poets whose voice has some of that quality as they really age, that it and like good, and like I feel like good mature stand-ups also, there's often like a way in which they're almost not writing, like they're almost not telling jokes, they're almost, it's just sort of it is so effortless to hear that it's almost confusingly effortless in like considering the composition of it, but it maybe it's partly just a matter of like trusting your hand.
Because I think really what's happening when you get to that stage of being really experienced is that you're just using all the tools. Like stand up, you're using timing, like the material itself, you're using spaces, you're using your physicality, all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're a poet, you just have this incredible, I feel like the poets who I really admire, I read their work and I'm like, this is all just years and years of trial and error and honing a gut instinct for what works on the page.
Where in your development are you, do you think? Like, where does this fall in your development as a poet?
I'm aware of the problem. I'm at step one.
Like, do you see this as like starting over in a certain way?
Yeah. It feels, this last couple of years has felt like a really big exercise in starting over, like every aspect of what I'm doing, which is pretty uncomfortable, but I'll survive.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, that's a hopeful sign. Like you want to be able to start over, right?
For sure.
Like, you don't want to be starting over is scary, but you don't want to be incapable of starting over.
No, you don't want to get stuck in one mode. Absolutely.
No, I'm excited for you.
You're back, Cameron. Oh, thank you.
I am. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, technology
went off in a
shit for a second.
Totally different direction, so it's all good.
Yeah, Alice was giving her account of line break theory, and we just said, we'll just assume that Cameron agrees with all of this and sign him off.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair assumption.
But you hated what I said about not wanting line breaks to be noticeable.
Yeah, I hated that. I hated that part. Yes, I hated. Well, I think line breaks should be noticeable. I mean, one of the things I do think Alice Oswald says that's very valuable in this lecture is that she says that some poets work in phrase, and the line break is normally is a non-enjammed break into silence after the phrase ends, and some poets work by pushing the phrase against the line break, and meaning tumbles over. And Milton is probably one of the greatest examples of that in the language. So I do, and I think I am, if I can make any critical statements about myself, which I think should be, considering that I'm talking about myself and also how young I am, I think that should be very suspect. But I think if I am allowed to do that, I certainly think I'm maybe of the second school, and I love pushing meaning as line breaks. I love how line breaks can tear apart phrases, and I like gutting meaning like that, or complicating phrases, or making it more jarring. So I guess I am more attracted to that noticeability. Not in every single line break, but certainly, I try at least once or twice probably in each poem. So that's why I sort of disagree with you there, Alice. But I also think you probably do that as well sometimes.
You being Alice?
Yeah, sometimes you want that expect.
Yeah, well, both of you, but mainly Alice.
Yeah. Sometimes you do need that effect. like with everything, it's like you can have both. You can have all of it. You can have interruptions and drawing attention to it, and you can have moments where it fades into the background, and it just depends on the effect that you want to go for. So I'm just not a great one to fight with because essentially I can see both sides of any argument. So yeah,
I was
it's not a
listening to
great sparring partner.
some like formal recorded moderated debates recently, and I just thought like this is sort of entertaining, but also I can't like I would be so bad at this because I get the combative part of it, but I also don't get being like having to just like scrap for every inch from your fixed position rather than just being able to try to understand things a little bit better.
Yeah,
Right,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want a boxing match. I want like a battle royale. I want there to be no goal. There's just, yeah,
Can I read a little bit of this Alice Oswald just so we can get to of
please.
just how confusing she can be?
Oh man,
Did
yeah.
you find a
I wrote
transcript or
this
did
out
you just
because
write it?
I just wrote it out because there were some quotes that I was just like, what by that? I love it, but I don't understand it at all. She says, most free verse poets use line breaks to undermine the grammar tune.
Oh
Hughes, as
yeah.
in Ted Hughes, Hughes' grammar is in his melody. Hughes' grammar is his melody. His musical silence also a semantic silence. And that was the moment at which I was like, I'm not at Oxford. I don't know what's going on. I'm so confused.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I understand that. I think it's more simpler than what than that seems. I think what basically that means is like the first part means some poets will in jam heavily. What she then goes on to say is that with Hughes, he does not in jam heavily. So when a
No,
phrase ends, the line ends. So the line ends on a comma or a semicolon or whatever, or not even a comma or a semicolon if he abandons punctuation like he does sometimes in Crow. But Hughes works doesn't break the phrase across the line. So when the phrase ends, the line ends, and that's sort of the
right.
silence that comes between the notes.
That's what she means by semantic silence. Okay, I get it
Yeah.
now.
Right. Like the line coincides with the phrase. Yeah. Here's the passage because I remember that grammar tune thing catching my ear and confusing me as well. Here's the passage I wrote down, not because I think it's like wrong or but just because it sort of blew my mind. She said, I have noticed myself if I write for a while in rhyming couplets, then take a break and go for a walk, the world arranges itself into matching pairs. I find myself
Mm,
looking at symmetrical seeds, trees with their shadows, to and fro bird calls, side by side footprints. If I'm using 6/8 sonnet form, the world seems full of interwoven patterns. I'm more driven to observe flowers when writing formal verse. I encounter more surprise, more movement when I'm writing free verse. And I thought like that seemed to me like one of three things. Like it's either like the idiotic description that like an intro to poetry book for children like it's like the idea that somebody who's never written a poem in his life has about how poets think, or it's like a 4-year-old boy who just watched a Batman movie thinking he's Batman when he walks down the street, or like it's just that she's a fucking genius and like her mind is insane and none of it makes sense, but she just has this way of thinking and being that's just beyond us. Because I thought like I
Hmm.
that sounds fine to me. Like I can't dispute anything she's saying. It just I don't I don't know what to say in response to it. Like I don't have anything like that experience, and I'm just sort of baffled by it. But this is what like this, and this is why it was
Not
like it's
not
such a strange like it for as a lecture it was such a strange thing. It was almost like it should be like a performance piece or like a diary or a like a self portrait. I don't know.
totally. Yeah.
I love her lectures.
It's definitely the third one though.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the third one.
She's
But I think
definitely
Oh, of course,
I
yeah.
agree with that. I agree with that slightly. I do find that sometimes, not to that extent, but I do get traces of
You
that.
perceive the world in a way that parallels the poetic forms you've been in the habit of using.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes. Not to the extent she
Mm.
does, but yeah, I do think a little.
I definitely draw on the things around me and sort of feed the monster of whatever I'm thinking about. But yeah, this sort of the perception things. That's why she also said that she just like arbitrarily said like an epic is a poem made up of lines. So Paradise Lost is a lyric because it doesn't pause very much. okay, but
Yeah, yeah. And
well, wait, is that what a lyric is also? Is the lyric the poem that doesn't like okay? I mean, again, like I just think like
was
Yeah.
she may just
her
be a genius whose verbal capacity, like yeah, I don't know. It's something. There's some kind of mismatch going on there.
yeah.
I'm meeting up with her quite soon, one to one, and I'll try and ask her some of these questions. But yeah,
Please say hi.
I will. But I like her theory of epic, but I don't think I fully understand it yet.
I would say, yeah,
The
like if you're
bit
gonna
that
meet
I
up with
got
her,
from that was sorry, go ahead.
no, I was
Go
just gonna
ahead.
say, like I would have her rather than like give you a private lecture, like get her to like anoint you with chrism and like prick her fingers and like rub her, blood on your palms to make you a better poet. Like that. I mean, I don't know. Like she
Right.
definitely could help you, but it'll be through the use of magic, not critical thinking.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, Alex,
Yeah,
you were
she's
saying
the fairy
something
queen.
that had some meaning to it.
No, I think I finally understood because she said all this stuff about epic being an art of lines and a broken melody through which something beyond the human is expressed. But then at the end, she said the epic voice is a voice beyond the poet's own. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, that I can
Yeah,
get with. Makes sense to me.
yeah.
But
Sing,
yeah, up
sing
until that
muse.
point, I was
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? Yeah.
But I love her. Out of all the Oxford lecturers, I love her uh the second most obviously because
Mhm.
who can surpass Jeffrey Hill. But yeah, I would much prefer going to her sort of strange, weird, poetically expressive, but not very technically accurate lectures than I would sort of Simon Armitage's incredibly dull, placid, but technically accurate
I
lectures that don't
imagine
say
it
much
being
at
like
all.
I imagine her being like a tiny bird-like British version of the Andre Gregory character from My Dinner with Andre. Like that's what I would imagine. Like having like spending time with her would just be like you just like sit down and drink wine and just you're in like a 3 hour trance while she just tells some fucking insane story about being buried alive and then having like a breakthrough and then understanding the Tao. You just leave thinking
Yeah, well,
like
literally,
sitting on the subway being like that was the most magical experience of my life and I can't paraphrase any of it.
I've gone to two of her poetry where every time she talks about dreams she's had and then makes us tell everyone each other about dreams we've had. Last dream she had, I remember, she said she dreamt that the head of Orpheus rose from a river and commanded her to write. She lives within sort of the poetic tradition completely, I think.
Yeah, good, good, yeah, good. She
Okay. Can you imagine like Brian at those workshops?
Oh my god.
I'm doing Brian sound in the chat that he hates people
Mhm.
telling like their dreams. It's just the image now just pops into my head. It's so funny.
Yeah, now I'm just like trying to find ways to exaggerate it to make it worse for him. Like people like sharing like mixed nuts in a bowl and not washing their hands, and like it's like people taking their socks and shoes off and putting their bare feet on the furniture around it. Yeah, like there's definitely some ways that could be.
Cameron, there was one little bit that I wrote out because it sounded so much like you. And I want to know. I
Okay.
want to know if I kind of got
Worryingly
this
so.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. She says poetry is a threefold practice, including the lyric, the dramatic, and the epic. If you miss this, you're left with only small, personal, sealed up poetry about what has been rather than what might be. Particularly that last bit, I was like, that's what you're concerned with. You want to move away from just the personal, what has been, and think about what might be. Is that fair?
That is partly fair. I think I'm not like opposed to like personal autobiographical description. I'm opposed to the language in which one that couches that autobiographical description. And I guess also I am kind of sick of the autobiographical. So I think that's fair enough. And that's fair.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a
Okay.
hypocrite. Most of my poems are autobiographical to an extent, although I try
Mm,
and create personas. But I'm sick of it, but I'm sick more of the language it's couched in, I think.
mm,
That's
mm,
where like again she reminded me of the Mary Gaitskill essay, and then it was like clearly this is a smart person who has a grasp of like these fundamentals, but then the way she talks about them doesn't actually make sense because she says like we have the epic, the lyric, and the dramatic, which are these sort of three major poetic traditions, which is all true. But then she says if you forget one or two of them, then you're left with just this. And she describes this like larval, like sub lyric sort of nubbin of a poem. And you think like, well, no, like part of those traditions is that like you had dramatic poems, which are called plays, and you had epic poems, which are called epics, and you had lyric poems, which are called like lyrics. And they didn't all that, like the ones that did all of those at the same time were epics. Like the epic combined the dramatic with the lyric and the narrative. That's the nature of the forms. Like if you, it doesn't, it's not like you lose them if you don't use them all simultaneously. Like having a lyric means that you're not also doing a dramatic poem at that moment. It just seems like she's got the idea in there. She just doesn't have, it's just like clear thinking is not her gift. She's just got a gift for being like a magus or something, which is great, which is all I would want her to be.
Oh man. I should go, but before I do, and you could use this or not, Matthew, but I was just, I'm thinking the thing that you said before when we were talking about Audre Lorde that's really like going to sit with me, I think, is when you said, this is what we've been doing. We've been sparring in this room. And like when I was listening to that Neo Georgian Hellscape episode, and often when I'm looking at the Substack, which I try not to spend too much time looking at, just because like
Not
for the
like
reason
an
that
ideal
like
lounge for you to hang out in. Chat with
no,
girls,
well,
you know.
well
Like
here's
endless
the
ranting with Jonathan.
A play full of cool
Yes.
dudes. Just have a drink with.
but here's the
It's the
thing,
most
right? It's
happening
like
bar on the scene.
it's not any of that. It's just like this stance, this like sparring kind of way of being with other poets is like so uncomfortable to me.
Yeah,
And I don't know if that's like a personal thing or what it is, but I just wonder how you guys think about it, because I was listening to that episode and I was thinking like, but these are real people and who will probably hear this at some point, and like again, just that thing that I asked you the first time I met you, Matthew, like aren't you guys worried? Like do you think people's feelings will get hurt?
So before Joanna and I had any kids, before we were even married, our friends Molly and Pete had a little baby named Henry, and then when Henry was like 2 or 3, we babysat for him a couple times while his parents could go out. And I did not really have experience with kids then, except from like tutoring, significantly older kids. But like we went over there for the first time, and Joanna, said, "Oh, he's so sweet. He's a little doll. He's a little blonde doll baby," and he sort of stood there and across the room after his parents left, staring at us. And I didn't think about it. I just got down on all fours and I growled at him, and he screamed and ran away and laughed. And then he came back in and like was like instantly like, "Oh, good, we're playing now. Like we're doing this." And I think like that Joanna didn't know where that came from and didn't understand it at all. But to me, it's very intuitive. It's like, no, this is how we play. Like this is how we have it. Like my dog's the same fucking way. Like she's like, "Can we play and do the thing where we fight?" I think at least part of it is that. I don't know. Cameron, do you have other thoughts?
I mean, I agree with that. Yeah, it's still true. Especially about the dog. My dog likes playing with me. I don't care if I hurt people's feelings. Maybe I would if I was close friends with them, but I also think I was close friends with them. I trust them enough to hurt their feelings anyway. In regards to like, I think their poetry is not aesthetically rising to what it could be. These are like most of the people we're talking about are established writers who get well praised in their own small new formalist circles. I on the other, like I don't see that my comments, if they have any critical weight or any critical insight, really deserve not to be said, because it might upset them when they have had their own sort of movement, their own their own praise directed amongst each other. I don't see that. I hope I will not be worried about upsetting people, unless that upset is from upsetting people by stating an aesthetic opinion. I hope, if I upset people because I state something horrible, inhuman or stupid, then completely fair. I hope I don't do that. But I love this podcast because it is so radically unafraid of being of being honest. And I think we need honesty more than ever in this sort of late capitalist hellscape.
Late capitalist. That doesn't matter.
Fair.
Alice, convinced, unconvinced, thoughts? Well, what?
Yeah, no, it sounds like I worry too much.
I worry obsessively about hurting the feelings of people I know.
Uh-huh.
Partly I think like with my friends, I'm used to playing rhetorically rough to a certain degree, and like giving grief is partly an expression of fondness. Like being ostentatiously rude to someone you're actually very close to is a way of showing affection. But I do worry very much about hurting the feelings of people I know. If you are very well established and I don't know you, I don't think it's that I don't care about your feelings. It's more like I don't think it makes sense to have your feelings be hurt if somebody like makes fun of your work or your speech or your writing. Like again, like I don't think I'm sure I'm not pure on this, but like I try not to go after people's like persons really. I usually go after things they say and write, and the same, like, and if you make fun of something I said or wrote and you don't know me and you consider me to be more established than you in some respect, I don't think I would have my feelings hurt by that. I don't think I have. I mean, like, I don't know. Eleanor didn't pull punches, and I thought it was like hilarious. But I also know I know there's a more complexity there for and it's easier for me because I have more distance. But yeah, but with people I know, I worry frantically about it all the time. Probably more so even than you.
Yeah.
My daughters, who should have been in bed a very long time ago, want to say hi to y'all. Speaking of that,
Hello.
quickly say hi.
Bye.
You gotta
They're big.
Yeah, hold on to him. Hold on to him. Alice, are you gonna have to run? What's your story?
I probably should, yeah. So
Okay.
I'll see you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I fucked up our schedule, screwed up our schedule. But it is good to talk to you again, and I'm looking forward to talking to you soon. And you're really the best. I know, and
You're the best too.
Yeah, I'm sorry for being a jerk about Audre Lorde.
It's okay. It's totally fine. It's good to talk to you both.
Likewise.
I
Yeah,
will
definitely.
see you soon.
All right, that was this week's show. You can if you don't know Alice's podcast, Poetry Says, go check it out. If you want to yell at Cameron personally, then he has contact information in the show notes. As does Brian, if you feel like yelling about Brian, even though he wasn't on this episode. And if you feel like yelling at me, then write to sleerickets@gmail.com. Your thoughts are always welcome. Whew. Boy, it was intense. It was intense, right? But I think good. Yeah. I've always been a fan of like heated conversations. It's one of the things. It's one of the traits that alienated so many of my ex-girlfriends. I just always found them sort of invigorating and helpful. Like, it's how I've learned a lot of things over the years. I hope you thought. I hope you found it worthwhile to please do let me know one way or the other. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.